industrial transitions through energy collaboration, technology, and innovation. I'd like to call our speakers on stage. Professor Cecilia WALLMARK, Director of the Hydrogen Initiative, Luleå University of Technology. HITESH KUMBAT, CFO, Kalpataru Power. Ignore the steps. Throw out the rule book. ISABELLA GUSTAFSSON, ISMODES, Research Program Manager, Industry Leap, Swedish Energy Agency. Per ANDERSSON, Head of the Secretariat, Leadership Group for Industrial Transition, LeadIT. And LUDVIG LINDSTRÖM, Senior Business Developer, International Market Developments, Swedish Energy Agency. Great. I would like to start by asking everyone to introduce themselves briefly to the audience, and also to say in a few words what about today is interesting to you and why you want to talk more about what you do on this panel. I'm going to start with you, Cecilia.
Thank you so much. It's very nice to be here. Thank you for having invited me. I would like to start with your last question, maybe. I'm very happy to be here since I think we really have to work together regarding the green transition to reach the climate targets. So that's the main objective, and I will get back to that. But what I do, I am, as you can see, the director of the Hydrogen Initiative, CESS, which we have located at Luleå University of Technology. And it's a broad initiative. We are cooperating both with researchers, with industry, and with the public partners to work on three different major things, I would say. So one thing is regarding research, of course. There is a lot of need for research in the hydrogen area. For the second, it's also about education. We all need to know more about hydrogen. And for the third thing, to support implementation also in the society of the hydrogen, such that we can receive and reach the climate targets that we need.
I think the microphone here is...
My time was over.
Very subtle about how we nudge behavior here.
Yeah, but since we know that hydrogen is now already stated as a key to reach the climate targets, we need hydrogen, and then we need to do all these things to succeed, I would say. So that's...
We're very happy to have you here because we'll unpack more about that later in the panel. Hitesh.
Well, first of all, it's so much interesting to see such a high level of energy and interest in these topics between Sweden and India. And I am privileged to sit next to somebody who is going to talk about hydrogen. And hydrogen, to produce hydrogen, it requires a tremendous amount of energy, power. And we are one of those companies which are working towards bringing power to people. So that's a brief introduction to us. We are a company who is engaged into construction of power lines, transmission lines, and grid infrastructure. And I'll talk about it a bit more later because many of you might be wondering, constructing grid infrastructure in Sweden, what are you doing here? So if Sweden is 100% electrified. But we are part and parcel of green transition. Our company is called Kalpataru Power. We are one of the leading construction companies from India. We do construction of not only power lines or grid infrastructure, but also other critical infrastructure like water, railways, etc. And I am based in Sweden, and we are one of the leading construction companies in this segment in Sweden. I would say one of the topmost in this segment. So we are quite privileged to be part of this journey here in Sweden.
Thank you so much, Hitesh, and we'll come back to talk more about that because I think you sit in a critical position with one leg on both sides of this corridor, seeing the challenges from different perspectives, and it'll be really valuable to hear more about that as we go forward. Ludvig, you were here last year as the Energy Agency talking about, as Cecilia Oskarsson mentioned earlier, the India-Sweden Innovation Accelerator. But we're taking that next step here, talking about broadening that scope. Could you give us a quick introduction and we come back to your summary points once you hear the conversation?
didn't really get the question, but...
Introduction.
Yeah, my name is LUDVIG LINDSTRÖM, and I'm working for the Swedish Energy Agency. We've been active in India since 2009. And as you heard, yes, we've been running the program India-Sweden Innovations Accelerator together with Business Sweden and CII-GBC. It's been a quite successful program. Today we're looking at some 250 collaboration projects, and that is after government support. And now we're looking into how we can expand our footprint in India and develop and leverage on all the contacts we have created throughout the years. And now we're aiming for the bigger impacts and then looking at how to collaborate with larger industries, and we're looking at the hard-to-abate sectors.
Great. Isabella, the question of course, give us an introduction and an indication of what you'd like to see on this panel. Why are you here? What do you want to talk about?
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. My name is ISABELLA GUSTAFSSON, and I work for the Swedish Energy Agency together with LUDVIG here. I work specifically with a government assignment that's called the Industry Leap, that has been mentioned here today before also. This is a Swedish support system, but I believe that there are a lot of opportunities to be able to build this ecosystem, that is the word of the day, together with other partners as well as India. So I think this could be a really interesting day to see how these partnerships and ecosystems can form.
Thank you so much. Per, LeadIT has been mentioned several times this morning. Tell us about the secretariat.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Per, and I'm the head of the secretariat. So the people you saw in the previous panel is 2/3 of my line management and the board. And we are, LeadIT, as you know, is today 18 member states, so it's a global initiative formed at the 2019 summit when the UN Secretary General asked India and Sweden to spearhead the initiatives. Why are we here? We see that the bilateral relationship between India and Sweden, maybe specifically in the innovation sector, is really progressing. Personally, I believe that if India and Sweden can show a deeper, strengthening partnership, this will have in our field, in the industry decarbonization, where change is so needed and green transition is so needed but so complicated, it will have a real effect. Here is a chance for two perfectly fitted partners to spearhead how to partner and how to do it innovative, how to do it well structured, even though we need to have that kind of disruptor mentality we heard about at the beginning. I think this panel is the perfect composition. You have research, academia, you have the companies, and the government sector. So I very much look forward to this.
Great. And I'm going to take from what you said, Per, kind of setting the stage. When we talk about collaboration and moving forward, we need to set a baseline in terms of what can we have as reference points, what's best practice, what do we want to take, replicate, and scale. Isabella, I'd like to come to you because, of course, you work with Industry Leap, and you've been working on this question-led application for some time. Tell us about that and some of the case studies coming out of this, especially in light of today's conversation on industrial and green transition.
Yes, that is correct. The Industry Leap was formed in 2018, and like I said, it's a governmental assignment where the aim is to reduce the emissions in Sweden and from the industry through innovation. So it's very much an innovative approach where projects need to have this high degree of innovation to be able to reduce the carbon dioxide emissions or greenhouse gas emissions through the industry, but also in the society where the industry can play a large role. What we have seen working with this for the last 5 or 6 years, we have seen the need for a lot of different technology pathways, and we have identified 5 technology pathways that are key to make this transition. One of them, of course, being hydrogen. The other one, electrification, biomass, as well as carbon capture and storage and carbon capture and utilization. So these 5 key technological pathways are what we support through the Industrial Leap. And the projects need to have some of these components and a high degree of innovation, of course. And to give you a few examples of what we have supported so far, of course, the most known, I think, internationally is the hybrid initiative from SSAB, Vattenfall and LKAB together to create fossil-free steel. We have supported that project through the entire development phases, the different development phases that I have had, from research to pilot plant studies and different pre-studies as well. And there you can see a combination of hydrogen and electrification that is needed to make this transition. And we were earlier also talking about the hard-to-abate sectors. So if we look at the cement industry, for example, you will see that you will need a mixture of electrification as well as carbon capture and storage, and also biomass. And I think we haven't talked a lot about the chemical industry, but if we look at the chemical industry and the refineries, we can see that also there we will need a mixture of hydrogen, electrification and biomass, as well as CCU, carbon capture and utilization, to be able to make this transition. So this is very important for us to be able to help these industries and help the industries help the society to make this transformation.
Of course, hybrid has been in the news a lot. And of course, you've got the research from A to Z and now the customer base as well. And that allows us to create this value chain that is so essential as we transition. The wanting to is not enough. It's the how does it happen. But I want to take a step back, because everyone in the room might not be on the same page when it comes to this magic word that we keep tossing around, which is hydrogen. And we're so happy to have Cecilia with us to kind of break it down and build it up, so as we move forward, we're all on the same page. Now, we've seen the outcomes of hybrid, green steel, looking at how to make industrial goods for industry that is actually decarbonized. But I'd like to ask you to start from the 101 for the room. What is hydrogen? Why is it important for the green transition question? What does it replace? And why should we care? A lot in one.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm happy to explain. Hydrogen, you might know already. That's the first element in the periodic table. It's a very lightweight molecule. It's the most lightweight molecule that we have. And it has very good properties, I would say, that we'd like to use. And when we speak about hydrogen, normally we speak about it as an energy carrier. It's very good to use this hydrogen. For example, we have it already in water, we have it in biomass and so on. But when we decide to split water, you know, water is H2O. It's hydrogen and it's oxygen. When we decide to split water, we need a lot of energy to do that. But what we get is hydrogen on one side and oxygen on the other side. And that hydrogen, which we have put a lot of energy to split the water to get lows, or to actually use biomass and take the hydrogen out of there, then we have an energy carrier, which is very, very interesting, because when you decide to use it again, it will not emit anything else than water again. So then we have an energy carrier which is helping us and assisting us to give an emission-free value chain. And we can decide to store this hydrogen in comparison to another energy carrier, which you know very well, electricity, which you also speak a lot about. That electricity has to be used in the same moment as we produce it. It could, of course, be stored in batteries or so, but here you have a possibility to store large scale in a longer time. It could be stored, although it's very expensive, it could be stored for days or for longer term. So this is the idea to use hydrogen as an energy carrier. So that's the first step regarding the production. And then we can distribute hydrogen. Today it's distributed and used a lot in the industry. We are distributing it in trucks or even in pipelines somewhere. And the most interesting thing maybe is and where we would like to use it. And the interesting thing here is that we can use it in the hard-to-abate sectors. That's the industry which today don't have any other opportunity to get climate neutral than to use hydrogen. The example Isabella gave you already, we can use it to produce fossil-free steel or so-called green steel. So that's one of the applications. And the other one, which I also mentioned, is just energy storage. We have a lot of wind power production, solar production, and so on. And here we have the weather-dependent production of energy, which we like to and need to store. So that's a second area, the second sector where we would like to use hydrogen. But also we like to use it in the transport sector. That property of hydrogen to be an emission-free link is so interesting. We can use hydrogen in a vehicle, in a car, in a train or a plane, and we don't have any other emissions than water and heat. So that's very, very interesting. And when we have long-distance transport, we can even use hydrogen to produce another fuel, liquid fuel, electric fuel. It could be, for example, methanol or some other electric fuel, and that could be used for shipping or for airplanes and so on. So we could use it almost everywhere, and it's really already identified to be a very large part of the climate neutral society. So in Europe or in China and so on, there are different kind of scenarios saying that between 10 and 25% of all energy used might go through the step of hydrogen in 2050. So it's a huge thing which we are about to transfer our society and energy system to.
Thank you so much. And we had a delegation here a few months ago coming from India, looking specifically at this in the hard-to-abate sectors, because this technology is something that now needs to be scaled and replicated, and of course has huge potential. Now, these companies are looking at partnerships as well, and looking at a government-to-government understanding of how to work together. And now I look at PAIR and LeadIT, because of course you're working with both the corporate sector and the government sector. How do you see technologies like the ones CECILIA talks about, and of course Isabella has been part of developing in hybrid, being replicated and scaled under the auspices of something like LeadIT, which has that overarching framework?
Thank you, Arati, and thank you for the question. I think, first of all, we all have to realize the scale of transformation. I think Celia very well described the scale, what is needed here. So not one single player on any level, local, national, regional, or global level, can do this. So the strength of the partnership will probably determine our success. Can we be creative? We'll come back to this, to the Sweden-India scene. How can two partners, and we have India and a Swedish company in our midst, how can they show and tell a story, how to partner? I think that's potentially has a global impact. How do you do that? How do we, and these are questions that we are currently faced with, and when we are designing the next leap here, how do we create a safe space for companies on both sides to really spearhead the technological co-development that is so needed? We do know in this sector that the lock-in effect, and some of the previous speakers have spoken to that, the lock-in effects on investment decisions are decades long. So whatever investments are made now, if we can change one or two of the investments, are huge, huge impact. So it's also coming to a scene where if LeadIT was formed in 2019, on those 4 years, the industrial policy globally have changed tremendously. You have introduction of the Green Deal in the EU, you have the IRA in the US, you have from the 1st of October the introduction of the CBAM, which is directly related to the cement and industry segments. You have a growing discussion on the global level playing field in the sector. how can we help each other to de-risk investments. From our side today, we try to track and create transparency to investments in the steel and cement sector, so try to track where the green investments are going. But we very much look forward to the future and how India and Sweden partnership can really spearhead this. Thank you.
And this is, of course, something that India and Sweden talk about a lot, because it's a really unique, ready-made opportunity to collaborate and to actually share ideas, share technology, and actually try out, as you say, how do we work with pilots? How do we start these ideas? You can't necessarily be ready-made and pick them off the shelf. And Hitesh, I want to come to you next, because you were nodding vociferously as Cecilia was talking, because of course the power of hydrogen for grid sufficiency, the power of hydrogen in terms of transmission. You now, of course, sit here as Kalpataru Power, but also LineMontage in terms of your business partners. What do you see when you look on both sides of this corridor about the real challenges and opportunities you face when it comes to transitioning?
It's a great question. I want to spend a few seconds to first of all explain what's going on in Sweden at this moment. So we heard about energy transition, industrial transition, green transition. So on one side, first of all, it is not purely the government in Sweden which is pushing the green transition. It's actually, we believe or we see that it's also coming very strongly from the industries directly. So the companies here in Sweden, you named few of them, LKAB, you named SSAB. All these companies are having initiatives, they have targets to go green, to transition from fossil fuel into a greener energy in the coming years. And they are lining up billions and billions of euro of investment over coming years to go green. And this is one of the key to their strategy. You talk about hydrogen, they all are focusing on using how do they use hydrogen or potentially other technologies to go green. There are companies which are working on concrete, green concrete, etc. But to the background of it, it is how will they go green? How will they go? How will they produce this kind of hydrogen, or how will they completely electrify their fleets or equipments? They need more electricity. Just to give you a perspective, LKAB projects that their electricity consumption would be close to 20 to 50 terawatt hours in the coming years. What does that mean from a Swedish perspective? That means they will consume roughly between 15 to 40% of the total power available in Sweden today. This is no joke. We talk about incredible amount of increase in power consumption in the industries. And this cannot happen unless, one, Sweden produces more power, and two, we are having strong grid which can transfer so much of power. When it comes to production of power, actually it's not that big a worry, because the entire Europe is connected, Finland is also surplus of power, etc., etc. So there is a lot of initiatives already in process to reach that goal. The challenge which we are facing really today is there is very much lack of transmission lines in Sweden. Those who are living on the southern side of Sweden might already know from last December, because the power prices in Sweden, in the south of Sweden last year went up significantly, while in the north, people were almost getting it for free. And that is exactly the segment where we are working on. We are working on constructing and helping Sweden in scaling up the grid transmission very fast. And this is actually the most critical piece in this, or let's say the missing and the least talked about link in this whole green transition, that how can we scale it up fast. Now coming on the India-Sweden aspect, we are originally an Indian company who are operating in Sweden for last four and a half years. We've been very successful in Sweden with our company called LineMontage here. We are one of the leading player here. we see that having an Indian ownership with a Swedish execution is a great combination. The Indian ownership brings in the appetite to take more risk, go fast, go strong, and at the same time, with the Swedish methodological thinking, the engineering capabilities which we have from Sweden is helping us greatly. We are not only now in Sweden, by the way, now we are going into Norway, we are going into Denmark, we are going into Germany. Somebody mentioned before that how normally a company in Sweden grow up. We are doing that, and that's only possible. So we are helping in other neighboring Nordic countries also in their green transition. And that these kind of combination, when an Indian company comes and works in a very unusual sector, it's not an automobile, it's not a IT sector or technology sector, but in a construction sector, and we see the difference coming in. So this is possible, and I think there can be more such discussions can be done if we work together.
I'm actually going to ask you a quick follow-up on that, Hitesh, because I think you've laid out the kind of scenario and the story very clearly for everyone. So when it comes to discussion we're having here, when you're working with grid sufficiency or grid maturity, and you talk about storage, and you talk about hydrogen, what does this mean for you moving forward in terms of the role this conversation can play in your business story?
We see this is the future, this is great, and it's welcome, but to make it practical, I think it has to work. I think this is still a bit of different, let's say, not a fully cooperated segment of discussion. So while the hydrogen discussion is happening, perhaps the factor that maybe there is enough electricity available is an assumption. And I wouldn't really confirm that, but I believe so, and we see that. But the reality for all the hydrogen projects to become successful, can they become more coordinated with the grid companies, with the Swedish grid, for example, that whether they will be able to deliver that kind of promises? And then coming back on to companies like us, that whether we can scale it up much faster because they need to go faster on the hydrogen initiatives. I think one country that is able to do these things much better is actually Sweden. So we're really looking forward to this.
Thank you, Hitesh. And I'm actually going to take that question that Hitesh has thrown out to both Isabella and Cecilia to say, of course, there is an opportunity. Collaboration is key. Ecosystem thinking, you touched upon that in the opening as well, in order to take what we know is possible and actually apply it to create that change we want so badly. Cecilia, I'm going to start with you, and Isabella, I'll come to you afterwards.
Thank you. Yes, it's really so that I can confirm both the huge need of power ahead and the need to provide further power production, further power distribution, but also hydrogen distribution and hydrogen production. So that's connected. And I think what you are looking forward to is really what we're into, to get the industry, the energy companies, and the society to cooperate. It's really also one of the reasons for why we were engaged in a project by the World Bank, Hydrogen for Development, where they are cooperating with us to also learn from which are the different corporations that we need to perform, how are we working. And I am, as much as do, looking forward to how is this really going to implement, but I can also see that this is really already very deep into discussion and investment decisions and so on. And we had the news last week that the new power line between Sweden and Finland will be built and so on. Were you involved in that one? Great. Yeah, and this type of exchange, we're speaking about the local ecosystem, but when I then visited India and that project with the World Bank I mentioned in April this year, I think it's also so interesting and clear to see that from the research perspective, we could have research on both the ecosystem, but not least as much technology that needs to be improved. We have the hydrogen technology available for implementation, but the more research, the more implementation improvement we could do, the better it will also work. And there were examples like having cooperation on hydrogen storage vessels and so on for the mobility sector. So there are so many different huge questions that could be collaborated on.
Thank you, Isabella, on the research questions, the opportunities, the collaboration that can take place.
Yes, thank you. I think that this is a very interesting topic because when we look at these large-scale projects, often we think about maybe one or two industries that are doing this together. But for these projects to actually become reality, there are a lot of other companies in the background that are working hard for this. For example, technology developers or consultants, and this is the kind of value chain and network and ecosystem that is needed to be able to make these projects happen. And that's where I see a potential for companies, for example, from India, that can come in with technology, with knowledge, and provide these Swedish companies and Swedish projects with knowledge as well. And I also just want to mention, I think HITESH said something very interesting about the industry's own power to transform and become green. And I believe that the state, we have an important role to show the way and to give support and aid to risk mitigate a lot of these projects. But in the end, it is the companies themselves that have the ambitions, that set the targets, and that want to do this. And we are happy to help, but they are the ones doing the hard work, and I think that's something that is so impressive in Sweden to see.
Thank you, and of course we talk about in Sweden the triple helix and how important that is in terms of A to Z, in terms of research to application and deployment. And that is, of course, industry, academia, and government working together. But one of the things, and Per touched upon it in his answer earlier, is investment. An industry-led investment, government-supported investment. And I want to come to you, to HITESH, again, as CFO. We talk about this need for moving forward faster, but Per also drew our attention to locked-in investment, putting money down now and having it seeded for the next 10 years. How do we pivot? How do we change? How do we talk to industry as enablers sitting on this panel right now to help you make those decisions faster and change those potentially locked-in investment decisions that will not support a green transition and a green future?
So far I have been talking about the Sweden part of our story. Now I think when you talk about investment, now I have to go to the Indian part of the story. So as you all know that India is one of the fastest growing country when it comes to investments into hydrogen, investment to renewable. The scale is just incredible. And I think that's where, this is one area wherein Sweden and India can collaborate more. There is a significant amount of capital available in Sweden, both from the industrial point of view and also from, so I talk about both the private money as well as the government money. So this investment resources which are available in Sweden can actually work in India to help and develop these green projects, because at the end of the day, this is now, I see this discussion happening wherein India is trying to move fast on energy transition, and a lot of Swedish companies would like to participate in that perhaps, and the financing could be a tool through which the Swedish companies can enter into this segment. And we talk about really large scale, so we don't talk about some few megawatts, 1, 2, 3, because that does not excite anybody in India. In India, people get excited when you talk about huge scale. And that is, again, companies like us could be enabler who are on both the sides, but that could be bringing in the investments towards the green transition, building really projects, perhaps on the hydrogen side, but also on other green energy projects in India, using financing from, and there are a lot of Swedish financing vehicle available, so using that tool, I think it could be a win-win solution.
That's really important because, of course, we can then talk about collaborative financing. So not just one actor, but a host of actors coming together, maybe using umbrella frameworks such as LeadIT to talk about that pivot. On January 4th, 2023, India signed the National Green Hydrogen Mission. So, of course, what we're hearing is that, as you say, Hitesh, India is interested. India wants to talk. India wants to understand what can be done. And the government has put their voice and support behind this transition and the need to have it. Now, of course, LeadIT, we talked earlier this day about LeadIT 2.0 and how we can use the opportunities that you've seen in the past few years, Per, to actually scale and to actually go forward in a new way and to take the learnings and apply them in this 2.0 initiative. You recently signed on a very, very important member to the LeadIT family, and that's Tata. And of course, that signifies how serious India is as one of the largest, oldest families, says, yes, we want to know more and we want to collaborate together. What does the future hold for LeadIT?
Thank you so much for that question, ARATI. Yes, Tata Steel is our last member company in. Also remember the last member state in the United States. So I maybe comment on the future. The details maybe you wait for COP. But a few comments on LeadIT. From our side, we think that there has to be a global forum to discuss industry and green transition. It's often political. Some viewers view it as polarized. We have member states in all continents. That I think is a very, very important global policy discussion. How we make a just and equal green transition at all levels, be it locally, regional, or globally, between countries. I think what HITESH spoke to, that it's about co-development. I think that's the story of Kalpataru is a very strong one. Maybe our ambition will be to give a framework or a forum for that kind of, where both parties on the corporate side feel that is a safe space to cooperate in. On the third element, maybe we will give way to partnerships that is spearheading the development. We know that, I touched upon this before, if we know that the appetite is there and the ambition is there on both sides of Sweden and India to progress bilaterally. We know that if the two parties, this comes from somebody who represents the secretariat serving 18 member states, but we know that if those two parties will do that, it has a global chain reflect, because it's such a strong partnership between two very well suited partners.
Exactly. You have India and Sweden taking the leadership role here that can really create these best practices that can be replicated, can be scaled. But also, I think what you say is so important, to create this safe space, to have that discussion and to know that you're having a peer-to-peer exchange between industry and leadership. Before I come to the Energy Agency to tell us about your 2.0 strategy for India, I'd like to ask our three panelists, CECILIA, HITESH, and ISABELLA, to say, looking forward, we talk about India and Sweden celebrating 75 years of diplomatic relations. We talk about the need to collaborate, to pivot and go forward for our sustainable transition goals and industry transition goals. What would you like to see? If you could pinpoint one factor in this, what would you like to see happen? Maybe seated at COP28, but also what would you like to see on the ground in the next 25 years? Cecilia, I'm going to start with you.
Well, that's a huge question.
Huge.
but to give some examples from the research perspective, I would be very happy to catalyze and continue the work which we have started from the Luleå University of Technology more this year, to actually see where we do have research initiatives that could be a very good match. It could, as I briefly mentioned, on technology used in hydrogen vehicles, the fuel cell vehicles, where we have one type of expertise in our university, and there are other expertises in the universities of India, and there are also companies on both sides which do need this development. And personally, I like, since I also used to be manufacturer of components for fuel cell vehicles, I like that as an example to see that here we do have some components that are very expensive today, and we need to increase the lifetime and so on. And we do know that we have research expertise in both countries. We do have companies needing those components. So that's one of the examples, but of course not least in the hard-to-abate sector, the industry sector, where we also have both researchers and the capacities in the industry, that kind of cooperation could increase how quick we could solve these things. And I know some very good examples where there already have been development and cooperation this year, and we have seen the first products for a few months. Since I liked your expression of the risk taking and the methodological way of working, when we find those type of matches that could help not only both these countries but also the whole implementation, I think that's very good examples.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Hitesh.
You know, there is a Greek expression or Greek word which I believe means the opportune moment. The word is called kairos. So I think this is a kairos moment, opportune moment wherein both India and Sweden are in the right position to contribute something to each other. So it's not one way, it's not unidirectional. It's a bi-directional relationship, and building stronger. I think when we engage more, Indian companies engage more with Swedish companies, not only on one or two sectors, but across the sector, we'll see a lot of action coming in. Sweden also needs a lot of infrastructure development, capability building, etc., which Indian companies can come and help. Whilst on the other side, India needs a lot of technology, scaling up, etc., to happen, wherein Sweden can go and help there. So I think it's a great moment. We really need to move fast, and we really need. This is one combination which can work well.
Excellent. Isabella, I come to you.
Well, the Industry Leap supports the whole innovation chain. So from research, the academia, of course, to testing and development, pre-studies, as well as investments. And I think that the last 5 years we have seen so much interesting research being produced through our support system. And now, for the coming years, I would love to see this research being implemented, tested, and scaled in Sweden. And this is something that I really look forward to. And I hope that both the academia together with industry can collaborate on making this a reality and making it happen.
That's great. I think you've given us the roadmap for the Energy Agency, but I'll come to LUDVIG now. What you're hearing from the answers in the panel is matching expertise and research and development with universities in terms of what Hitesh is saying, kairos, the opportune moment for industries to speak, for government to speak, for researchers to speak is now. And Isabella saying, let's take what we know and put it on the ground. Let's implement, let's create pilots, let's do this together. I come to you for the closing remarks, LUDVIG. What is the Energy Agency looking to do in India? You've done ISEA, the India-Sweden Innovations Accelerator. Over 10 years, over 200 collaborations on the ground. What are you looking to do with India in the next 25 years?
25? Well, we start actually tomorrow. Talking about the right time. When I started working with India, one of the strongest advices we had to give to the companies that we brought was that Indian counterparts are not interested in guinea pig projects. They don't want to play that role. They want to see proven technologies. And but what we have seen throughout the years, and just the recent years, is that now actually there's a shift in that view of development. Now Indian actors are actually scouting all over Europe and especially in Sweden to find the upcoming solutions. And also, if you look at it from a climate perspective, because we're also responsible for that for the Swedish government, we want to collaborate with India on climate solutions, climate projects, but there is a hurdle because the government targets is set for 2070. Well, that is the Indian government. If you talk to the Indian industry, then they say 2045 at the most, or 2030, 2035. But no one say anything further than 2047. So, looking at the industry, they are actually moving faster than what the government want to commit to. So, what can we do then? Well, we have throughout the years, we have developed a strong network with these large players, the big conglomerates. You mentioned Tata, Dalmia, Reliance, Mahindra, and so on. We have already developed those relationships, and now it's time to understand how can we facilitate collaborations on a bigger scale. Not just introducing small, medium-sized companies to India. Now we're trying to look at the big objectives. And that is how to work with the transition, industrial transition, of course, aiming for the climate goals. And I don't want to go into any details, but the steel sector could be one interesting area. And that also reflects how this is all connected. We're talking about green steel, but what we're actually talking about is hydrogen. And again, how to produce hydrogen, okay, you need the power. So everything is interconnected, and we need to bring that whole picture of how things are interconnected. We need to bring that into the future work of collaborations.
One thing that SIBC talks a lot about when we talk about India and Sweden is business culture, and how you have to match business culture to make things move forward. And in today's panel, we've picked up some key things when it comes to business culture and what we should have on the table as we go forward. I think ecosystems is critical. Triple helix, of course, research, government, and industry. And I think Hitesh touched upon it, and Ludvig, you come back to it, the importance of catching India's attention with scale. We need to be talking about how one solution can be replicated to scale, and that becomes an important aspect of conversations going forward. Thank you all so much for being with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, if we could give them a hand of applause for joining us on stage.